Number 1.
In the hustle and bustle of New Year's Eve, it's easy for items like car keys or coats to be misplaced. What isn't expected, though, is for a loved one to disappear. 27-year-old Ben Coffey was in Gloucester, Virginia, when he last spoke to a friend around dinnertime on New Year's Eve 2012, according to his mother Nancy, who has requested her last name be omitted. Nancy says family had last spoken to Ben on Christmas Day, when they'd gathered to celebrate the holiday. Of course, at that point, he was a grown man, so we didn't necessarily speak with him every day, Nancy told Dateline. Nancy says her son told a friend he was going home for the night because he was tired. Unbeknownst to Nancy at the time, Ben never made it home. The next day, according to the Virginia State Police, authorities found Ben's van in Tappahannock, Virginia, about 1 hour away from where Ben was last seen. On New Year's Day 2013, Tappahannock police responded to a report of a disabled vehicle on Route 698, also known as Hobbs Hole Drive, in the town of Tappahannock, a Virginia State Police press release reads. Police found a 1998 Dodge full-size van abandoned on the side of the road. The vehicle was registered to Coffey. There were numerous personal items belonging to Coffey still inside the van, along with a dog. The press release continues to say Ben's dog, Clue, had been taken to a nearby animal shelter before being returned to Ben's family. Terry Coffey, Ben's father and Nancy's ex-husband, told local media that police contacted him on January 3 to tell him Ben's car had been found. You don't leave your van on the side of the road, basically in a ditch, and disappear, Ben's father Terry said. Ben's mother Nancy told Dateline that authorities initially went to Terry's house because Ben's van was registered to his father's address. Ben's father called me right away, Nancy said. I spent that whole night calling Ben's friends and asking if they had heard from him or knew where he was. Terry told local media that the family reported their son missing that day, and investigators soon conducted a search of the area near where Ben's car had been found. A bloodhound traced his scent to a swamp, and they lost the scent, Terry said. To put it bluntly, to know whether he's alive or not is difficult. Because this kind of situation, you're always searching and thinking and looking. Nancy said that friends and family initially thought Ben may have gone away for the weekend of his own accord. He was very much a free spirit and was known to take off for a weekend, Nancy said. But once a month had passed, we knew better than that. We quickly knew that something wasn't right. Dateline was unable to reach investigators with the Virginia State Police by Tuesday afternoon, but Nancy confirmed to Dateline that the family is offering a $10,000 reward for information that either leads to Ben's whereabouts or an arrest and conviction in his case. My hope is that, by getting the word out, people might take a second look at their properties, Nancy said. Each year around the anniversary of Ben's disappearance, his family posts on the Help Us Find Ben Coffey Facebook page about the pain they still feel. We are missing Ben Coffey during this holiday season. Our hearts are heavy as we remember the fun Christmas celebrations together, a post read. We continue to look for Ben and still hope that we will find answers. Ben Coffey is 5'6" tall and weighs approximately 150 pounds. He has short, brown hair, hazel eyes, and the symbol for the band Coheed Cambria tattooed on his right arm. Ben was last seen wearing a tan Carhartt brand jacket, jeans, and leather boots. Anyone with information on Ben's disappearance is asked to please call Virginia State Police Special Agent A.S. Witt at 804-537-6770.
Number 2.
Brittany Shante Robinson was only 14 years old when she vanished on June 14, 2012. She was last seen in Mobile, Alabama, after her aunt dropped her off at the home of her father, Demetric Hooper. Brittany was only supposed to be with her father for a 2-day visit, but she never returned home and has never been seen or heard from again. Demetric fled Mobile immediately following Brittany's disappearance. A warrant for his arrest was issued 6 weeks later. Investigators were finally able to track Demetric down in September 2012 at a mental health facility in Arkansas. He suffered from both schizophrenia and drug addiction and had previously been in and out of treatment centers in Alabama for years. During September 2012, Demetric reportedly was seeking treatment for his schizophrenia. Once police tracked him down, they confirmed that Brittany was not with Demetric in Arkansas. He was then arrested and charged with felony custodial interference. After Demetric's arrest, investigators determined that he had been in Arkansas since July. However, in the weeks following Brittany's disappearance, he traveled to multiple different locations throughout the southeastern United States. On July 7, 2012, Demetric took a bus from Memphis, Tennessee to Arkansas, and it was determined that Brittany was not with him during said trip. When police finally tracked him down, they found Brittany's iPod, knives, and a rope in his possession. Demetric continuously denied harming his daughter, and a search of his home provided no evidence of Brittany's whereabouts. Due to this, police were unable to charge Demetric with anything related to Brittany's disappearance, but they still pursued the custodial interference charges. After initially denying those charges as well, Demetric ended up pleading guilty to custodial interference in August 2014. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Brittany remains missing today. The Mobile Police Department is in charge of her case. If you have any information that could lead to Brittany's whereabouts, please contact detectives at 251-208-1700.
Number 3.
Lavena was born on July 27, 1985 in Florissant, Missouri. By all accounts, she had a very stable and loving childhood and maintained good relationships with both of her parents. Her father was Dr. John Johnson, who had served in the military. It's likely that her father's status as a veteran helped inform Lavena's decision to enlist. She maintained a spot on the honor roll at Hazelwood Central High, continually demonstrating her intelligence. Everyone who knew the young woman described her as capable, intelligent, and fun-loving. It seemed unanimous that Lavena Johnson was a good person with a bright future ahead of her. Once she graduated high school, Lavena chose to enlist in the United States Army. It's likely that her father's status as a veteran helped inform Lavena's decision to enlist. Lavena completed basic training and after a short time, her unit was deployed to Balad, Iraq. Lavena reported a sexual assault in the time before her death, though no action seems to have been taken as a result of this report. After 8 weeks in Balad, tragedy struck the private first class, which is alternately known as rank E3 in the Army. Lavena was found dead in her tent, and the death was quickly ruled a suicide. According to Army records, Lavena hung out with a male soldier on the night of her death, though the records claimed she and the man parted ways around 8 p.m. At around 1:20 a.m. on July 19, 2005, Lavena was found dead inside a military contractor's tent. She was found laying on the ground with a pool of blood around her head, an M16 rifle nearby. Little is known, or has been released, at least, about the period of time between her leaving her male companion and the point at which her body was found. There are two trains of thought when it comes to speculation on what actually happened to Lavena: she truly did complete suicide, or she was murdered. The official ruling was that Lavena had taken her own life. The logic behind the suicide ruling is shaky at best, and most speculation revolves around the previous sexual assault. The autopsy claimed that the barrel of the gun was in her mouth when she fired, but there are so many holes in the official accounting of events. Lavena's family and internet sleuths have been disputing the official ruling since it happened. Lavena had excitedly spoken to her family about her plans for the future just a few days prior to her death. In addition to their skepticism that Lavena would take her own life, the autopsy and accompanying photos furthered their conviction that the Department of Defense ruling was incorrect. First, the entry wound looked far too small to have come from the M16 that was found with her, and the wound was found on the side of her head, not in her mouth as the Army originally claimed. Second, Lavena's face had extensive damage, including a broken nose, cut lips, loose teeth, and a black eye. These injuries are not consistent with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Third, and this is by far the most gruesome detail, some kind of corrosive liquid was poured over her genitals, an act, it would seem, that was meant to destroy any DNA left behind. Fourth, no rape kit or fingernail scrapings were taken during the autopsy. Fifth, no bullet was ever recovered from the scene. Sixth, Lavena's gloves were glued to her hands, something that defies explanation. Regardless of what you believe is the truth, it does seem like the Department of Defense had a hand in covering something up. They may have attempted to keep a suicide out of the papers so as to not damage their reputation and subsequent recruitment numbers. It seems logical to me that news of someone feeling so mistreated that they take their own life may sway some potential enlisters. I also think it is absolutely possible the DOT is shielding someone from blame, whether that blame be for sexually assaulting Lavena. Sexual assaults are notoriously underreported in the military and often not taken seriously when they are reported, or for killing her. This point especially strikes true to me if the person responsible was of a higher rank. The bottom line here is that we do not have the whole story, thanks to several factors. Personally, based on the evidence, I believe that Lavena died at someone else's hand, not her own. I don't know who, and I don't want to cast aspersions on any suspects without all the information. All I can say at this point is that I hope one day the rest of the information comes out. Lavena's family and her legacy deserve closure.
Number 4.
Brittney Wood was 19 years old when she went missing from Alabama on May 30, 2012. Her disappearance opened a Pandora's box of family secrets, ultimately leading to 11 convictions and the discovery of the largest child sex ring Alabama has ever seen. A single mother to a 2-year-old girl, Brittney had far from an easy start in life. She was molested as a child by her step-grandfather, who was later sentenced to life in prison. As she reached her teens, Brittney became involved in drugs and was bouncing from home to home at the time of her disappearance. She had last been seen on the way to her uncle's house. The uncle in question, Donald "Donnie" Holland, was under investigation at the time, facing numerous allegations of child sexual abuse against members of his family. On the day that Holland was scheduled to be questioned, he took a gun to his head, killing himself and taking his secrets to the grave. The gun, police later found out, belonged to Brittney Wood. Volunteers searched the 5-mile radius surrounding Donnie's house, but found no trace of the troubled young woman. As authorities delved further into the case against Donnie, they uncovered a depraved and incestuous sex ring that shook the community to its core. Investigations revealed that Donnie, his wife Wendy, and numerous other relatives had been taking part in group sex parties for years, sharing each other's children under the guise of family barbecues. Groomed from an early age, as many as 16 children were abused by the gang, forced to watch the others until they were deemed old enough to take part. Despite several formal complaints of abuse going back at least 6 years, it seems that none of these allegations were seriously pursued. Wendy Holland, wife of Donnie and maternal aunt of Brittney, was found guilty of a range of abuse charges in 2015 and was sentenced to 219 years in prison. Wendy's twin sister, Mendy Kent, was also found guilty and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Mendy's husband, Dustin Kent, pled guilty to his charges and was sentenced to 17 years in prison. Randall Wood, brother of Wendy, Mendy, and Brittany's mother Chessie, pled guilty to his charges and was sentenced to a 15-year split sentence, of which only 3 were spent in prison. Brittany's brother, Derek Wood, was granted youthful offender status, and as such, his records are sealed. Wendy and Donnie's son, Donnie Holland Jr., was also granted youthful offender status. Brittany's mother, Chessie, pled guilty to the misdemeanor of reckless endangerment. In addition to the 8 family members, 3 family friends, William Bonnie Brownlee, James Cumby and Nelton Butch Morgan, were also charged. Despite the large number of arrests, none of the accused gave any indication as to the whereabouts of Brittney Wood. Some suspect that she may have disappeared following an act of vigilante justice against her uncle Donnie, a theory fueled by the unusual position of his gunshot wound. While self-inflicted gunshots are typically directed to the side of his head or via the mouth or forehead, Donnie was found with an injury to the rear of the head, behind his ear. Considering what Brittany knew about her family, it seems unlikely that she would leave her 2-year-old daughter behind. However, it is worth noting that the little girl was in the custody of her father prior to Brittany's disappearance. Brittany's stepmother, Stephanie Hankey, has since revealed that a female family member had told Brittany she had been raped by 3 male relatives just days before she went missing. It is possible that, with investigations pending, the family needed Brittany to be silenced. The circumstances surrounding the discovery of Donnie's body have certainly raised suspicions. He was found in his SUV by his wife Wendy and a female friend, who incidentally would also later be accused of sexual abuse and the production of child pornography. Alongside Brittany's gun, her cell phone battery was found in the car, perhaps removed in the mistaken belief that it would prevent her phone from being tracked by police. Hankey believes that Wendy Holland holds the key to Brittany's disappearance, but 6 years on, she has given nothing away. The perpetrators may be locked behind bars, but for Brittney Wood, justice is yet to be done. Speaking to Case Remains, Brittany's mother Chessie said the following: "It's been 6 years since Brittany went missing. Wish I could say it gets easier, but that would be a lie. Through the grace of God, we have learned to cope with her not being in our lives. We also realize that she is now in the hands of our Father in heaven. Knowing this gives us the greatest peace. We focus on the good memories we have of Brittany, which make us smile. Please keep her and her daughter in your prayers."
Number 5.
Cindy Rivera went missing at the age of 19 on June 30, 2012. The young mother was last seen at her father's house in Las Vegas, New Mexico, where she lived with her family members and a bedridden man who was under her care. Cindy left the home on the evening of June 30 after telling the bedridden man that she would only be gone for a few minutes. Unfortunately, she never returned. Cindy left her infant son in the bathroom, and the bedridden man reportedly heard the baby crying all night. When Cindy's family members returned home the following morning, they found Cindy's slippers, a few cigarettes, and a lighter strewn across the ground outside. Both Cindy and Cindy's car were nowhere in sight. She was reported missing shortly thereafter. Over the years, police have reportedly followed many leads in the case, but Cindy has still not been found. Cindy's family members believe that she was kidnapped and murdered. In fact, they originally named 2 different men as the probable killers, one of them being her ex-husband and father of one of her children. The family members later stated that they believed the ex-husband was the one responsible, and they had even heard rumors that he bragged about killing Cindy and burying her in a remote desert area. Despite this, police have not named the ex-husband or the other man as suspects in the case. They stated that they simply do not have probable cause to execute search warrants on either man. Neither of them have been publicly identified, but they reportedly have not been cooperative with the investigation and have both obtained lawyers. Cindy remains missing today. The Las Vegas, New Mexico State Police are investigating her case. If you have any information that could help the investigation, please contact authorities at 505-425-6771. Update: July 2021. A man named Anselmo Chemo Richard Ortiz, 37, has been charged in connection with Cindy's disappearance. According to the affidavits, Ortiz is believed to have helped Cindy's ex-husband, Christopher Trujillo, kidnap and kill Cindy around the time of her 2012 disappearance. Many have long suspected that both Trujillo and Ortiz were involved in Cindy's disappearance. However, investigators initially did not have enough to charge either of them. A year after Cindy's disappearance, Ortiz was convicted on drug trafficking charges and was in prison from 2013 to 2019. Upon his release, Ortiz reunited with Trujillo and began working for him at his towing company. At that point, their relationship began to sour. Trujillo reportedly accused of Ortiz of using company credit cards for personal charges. He also threatened to harm Ortiz's son. During April 2021, Ortiz reached out to investigators, stating he wanted to speak with them about Cindy's disappearance. He also began to reach out to Cindy's family members on Facebook. Around the same time, Trujillo began behaving erratically. On May 2, 2021, Trujillo's wife contacted the police and stated that Trujillo was threatened to harm both Ortiz and himself. Shortly thereafter, Trujillo killed himself in La Cienega. Police retrieved his phone, which included record conversations that incriminated him in Cindy's disappearance. During one of the conversations, Trujillo stated, "I killed my ex-wife, Cindy Rivera, and buried her in the national forest. I'm going to tell them Ortiz killed her and buried her." Ortiz remains in jail while his charges are pending. Cindy's remains have still not been found.
Number 6.
24-year-old Derek Lueking has been missing since March 17, 2012. That morning, Derek's roommate Ryan Molden noticed that Derek's alarm was continuously going off. At the time, Ryan thought Derek had left for work early and simply forgot to turn off his alarm. However, when it was later determined that Derek had not shown up for work at all that day, Ryan knew something was wrong. He contacted Derek's parents, who subsequently traveled from Virginia to Derek's home in Knoxville, Tennessee, to search for their son. Derek's parents soon learned that Derek had searched the Great Smoky Mountains on his computer shortly before he vanished. He also purchased maps of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a tent and sleeping bag, in addition to a military survival manual, a compass thermometer, a pocket knife with a sharpener, a fire starter, parachute cords, granola bars, and other survival items. On the surface, this does not seem too unusual, as Derek's parents describe him as an avid camper and hiker. Derek's computer also revealed that he booked a room at the Microtel Inn, a micro-hotel in Cherokee, North Carolina. Cherokee is an approximate 2-hour drive from Derek's home in Knoxville. Derek's parents went to the hotel, where they saw surveillance footage that showed Derek checking in during the early morning hours of March 17, 2012. The cameras captured Derek later exiting the hotel around 4 a.m. This is the last confirmed sighting of him. Derek's parents then drove from the hotel to nearby hiking trails, where they found Derek's car parked at the Newfound Gap area of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Due to the fact that Derek had purchased numerous camping survival items prior to driving to Cherokee, his parents at first that he might have just gone for camping trip in the mountains. However, many of the items Derek had purchased, including the tent, had been left in his car, Additionally, a note written by Derek was found inside the car. It simply read, "Don't follow me." Derek has never been seen or heard from again. A search of the area did not reveal any clues, and none of Derek's other items have been recovered. Due to this, some have theorized that Derek could have started a new life somewhere else, but staged scene to make it look like he went off into the mountains. A more common theory is that Derek encountered some sort of danger while hiking in the mountains, or that he might have taken his own life. None of these theories have been confirmed, and Derek's case is still open. The National Park Service is in charge of his case. If you have any information that could lead to his whereabouts, please contact 828-497-1940.
Number 7.
On a late summer day, in the town of Columbia, South Carolina, a strange occurrence was unfolding down near the river. Columbia, a relatively large city of 100,000 people, is split in half by the Congaree River. The Congaree is the result of two different rivers, the Saluda and Broad Rivers, which meet at the junction where Columbia was founded. A man was going down to the Congaree River, to a secluded little stretch of land hidden away from the main roads. He parked in a gravel parking lot, which you really had to know existed before going there. Just a short distance away, shrouded by a small patch of woods that thrived alongside the river, was a boat ramp that plunged into the Congaree. Jack was 65 years old, a military vet who had spent time in Vietnam. He was, by all accounts, a regular guy. He was unmarried, with only a single child from his lone marriage and now 2 young grandchildren, and other than some volunteer work he did, he primarily kept to himself. On a Saturday, August 17, 1996, the temperature in Columbia was in the low 90s, which isn't unusual for this time of year. It'd be the type of weekend you'd imagine spending down by the river. The sun would not set until roughly 8 p.m., and it wouldn't be truly dark until 8:30 or 9 o'clock. At the time Jack Robinson arrived at this parking lot, approximately 6 p.m., it would still be daylight. Yet, despite the sun still shining, despite the handful of witnesses that saw Jack arrive at the parking lot, police have yet to figure out what the man was doing at this boat landing. Jack didn't sail, nor did he own a boat. None of his records indicated that he was meeting someone at this lot, but that's what witnesses recall: Jack meeting a man, speaking for a few minutes, before the conversation turned fatal. This is the story of Jack L. Robinson. Jack Robinson was born on July 24, 1931, in Columbia, South Carolina. At the time, Columbia was in the middle of an economic surge, becoming a major business hub in the Carolina-Georgia area. Little is known about Jack's parents, Joel Littleton and Ethel Mae Bradley Robinson. Jack took his family name from his mother, implying that his father didn't play a huge part in his childhood. However, we do know that Jack was not alone in his development. He had at least one brother, named Odell, and 3 sisters, named Connie, May, and Myrtle. All of his siblings are now deceased, save one, a sister who is now closing in on 90 years old. Jack and his family lived in the Olympia neighborhood of Columbia, an area that cropped up in the early 1900s, around the Olympia textile mill. He attended Olympia High School in the time period following World War II, and growing up in that time period seems to have inspired him to follow a career path, that of a United States Airman. Shortly after graduating from high school, Jack enlisted in the U.S. Air Force. He was sent off to basic training, and his first post took him to the furthest corner of the United States, Fairbanks, Alaska. Jack would go on to spend 25 years in the Air Force, rising to the rank of technical sergeant, no easy feat, as an enlisted airman. Throughout his 2.5 decades of military service, Jack saw time in Vietnam, an experience that he never really talked about with his family. Throughout his time in the military, he had a child, a daughter, named Tammy. She would be his only child, but the two would remain close throughout the rest of Jack's life. After retiring from the military, Jack returned to the area that he had been born in, Columbia, South Carolina. This is where Tammy grew up, a town steeped in history, divided by the Congaree River, a river that would go on to play a vital role in this story. After retiring from the military, Jack Robinson entered civil service, getting a job at the nearby Moncrief Army Health Clinic in Columbia's Fort Jackson. I can't really tell you what he did in this job, but various news articles have referred to him as a laboratory employee. This could point to any number of positions within an army hospital, but he had close relationships, personal and business, with the many doctors, nurses, and technicians he worked with. Jack worked at the Moncrief Hospital for 20 years and retired from there as well. At this point, you'd imagine that Jack, in his early to mid-60s, would be living the easy life. He had 2 pensions, a small family consisting of his siblings, his daughter, and 2 grandsons, and all of the time in the world. However, according to reports, Jack didn't use this time to simply rest on his laurels. Jack had been slightly involved in politics throughout his life, but he spent some of this time off to volunteer and work more closely with his local Democratic Party. And other than that, he was noted for constantly volunteering at homeless shelters and soup kitchens. Many point to this being where he would meet his eventual killer, but Jack was constantly keeping busy and trying to accomplish some good in the world with his spare time. Going into 1996, Jack had accomplished a life's worth of achievements before the typical age of retirement. He had spent over 45 years as a civil servant, including a stint in Vietnam, and was now looking forward to the next chapter of his life. He lived in the Wellesley Place Apartments, in the northeastern reaches of Columbia, Sandwood. It wasn't the best apartment that money could buy, but it was comfortable enough for Jack. He had a number of friends, but by all accounts, was an incredibly quiet guy who kept to himself in his apartment at 3630 Ranch Road. Jack had had a good relationship with his daughter, Tammy, and her 2 sons, Doug and Matthew. Tammy was now a woman grown and had introduced her own children to the world in the mid-1980s. Both of Jack's grandsons have fond memories of the man, even though they didn't get to see him much in the weeks before his death. On July 24, 1996, Jack celebrated his 65th birthday. At the time, neither he nor his family were aware that it would be his last. On August 17, 1996, Jack drove from his apartment in Wellesley Place to the middle of Columbia, roughly a 10-mile trip. There's no indication that he was meeting up with anyone or knew who he was going to be speaking to. Jack parked nearby the Rosewood Boat Landing, which has since been renamed the Jordan Memorial Boat Ramp. If you look up the area online, you'll notice that even now, over 20 years later, the boat ramp is a little out of the way. It's connected to the city center, but you have to take some back roads to get to the landing. The boat landing itself is just a ramp that descends into the waiting Congaree River, and the area, which is little more than some pavement and gravel, is surrounded by a ring batch of woods. It's likely that Jack was heading to this spot for a reason, but the reason has never been clarified because of the events that would follow his arrival. It was around 6 p.m. that Jack arrived, but perhaps just before. It was still bright out, as the sun doesn't set in Carolina until at least 8 o'clock throughout the summer months. There were 3 witnesses that saw Jack arrive and meet up with another man. The other man was younger, with darker skin and sunglasses. The 2 men seemed to know one another, or, at least, that's how it appeared to anyone watching. These 3 witnesses were parked in the same parking lot and waiting for a concert nearby to get started. Sitting there and waiting, They saw Jack and the other man meet up in the parking lot and head to a grass clearing in the surrounding woods. The two men got out of sight, but before long, an argument broke out between them. The three witnesses only heard bits and pieces of their argument, primarily Jack. He was making claims about money, saying that he could get money for the other man. One of the witnesses heard Jack loudly exclaim, "What is it that you want?" before the argument seems to have gotten physical. The man who had been arguing with Jack ran off on foot, and Jack came walking out of the wooded area, clutching his stomach. He was bleeding from multiple wounds and pleading for help. The witnesses called an ambulance for Jack, and he was rushed to the nearby Palmetto Health Richland Hospital. But by that point, his wounds had grown too severe. Within 3 hours, Jack L. Robinson had passed away. The autopsy showed that Jack had suffered at least 3 wounds to his stomach and had been cut once on the side of his face. Some records have indicated that this might have been to his ear, but it's unclear. Jack also had defensive cuts to his hands, implying that he did not go quietly. He was trying to fight off his attacker, who, by all indications, was much younger than him. The ultimate cause of death was a perforated liver due to the stab wounds to his gut, but Jack had also lost an extreme amount of blood on the way to the hospital. The 3 witnesses, who had been there to help get Jack emergency treatment, gave their statements to police. They all described what they had seen, both Jack and the mysterious suspect showing up at the Rosewood boat landing and walk off into the woods. Based on their statements, it's unclear whether the two met up at the landing or just so happened to be walking together, but by all indications, the conversation between the two was as acquaintances. The witnesses, and now police, believed that Jack and this mysterious person of interest knew each other. The witnesses gave a solid description of this man to police, and they made a sketch of this suspect, which you can still find online. This man was olive-skinned, likely Hispanic, and he was between the ages of 25 and 35. He wasn't that big, standing approximately 5 feet 5 inches and weighing somewhere between 150 and 180 pounds. He had black hair and a light mustache and was wearing aviator sunglasses, so the witnesses couldn't get a good look at those obscured features. As police began to work with that description, the family prepared for their mourning. Jack L. Robinson was memorialized at the Southern Baptist Church on Thursday, August 22, less than a week after his death. The ceremony was presided over by Pastor Charlie Arnold, and Jack's grandsons, Doug and Matthew, stood as pallbearers for their grandfather. Jack was then buried at Green Lawn Memorial Park, where he rests today. He was given full military rights before being laid to rest. His daughter, Tammy, despite now living in Florida, returns regularly to his grave to pay her respects. The police began to investigate the cause and the meaning of Jack Robinson's death, which ultimately boiled down to a single question. What was he doing at the boat landing on that particular Saturday? Jack did not own a boat, nor was he known to sail. So, then you ask yourself, why else would Jack show up on a boat landing at 6 p.m. on a Saturday evening? Drugs? Alcohol? According to all records, Jack didn't indulge in either. He had no history of drinking or using any known drugs, so that was another trail that led nowhere. Police scoured through Jack's phone records and bank statements, hoping to come across something that could lead them in the right direction. But according to both, Jack was a relatively mundane individual. Nothing in his records stood out to them. As I said earlier, he mostly kept to himself, other than visiting family and volunteering. From his phone records, police were able to definitively state that he did not make plans to go out that evening. At least, not via telephone. So this led them to the very real possibility that the man who had killed Jack, whom he had talked to as an acquaintance at the Rosewood boat landing, had run into him on a chance encounter. However, when Jack's daughter, Tammy, spoke to police shortly after his murder, she was told something incredibly surprising. One of the theories police were circulating was that the man who had killed Jack, whom he had met at the boat landing and walked into a small clearing at the edge of the woods with, was Jack's gay lover. If you listen to Tammy talk about this, you can hear the skepticism in her voice. To me, this doesn't sound like the most outlandish theory. Jack, having been born in the 1930s and spending over 25 years in the military, would have some outdated thoughts on being gay. It's possible, if he was engaging in that kind of activity, that he would keep it quiet. He wouldn't tell his family or friend circle, at least. It's possible that throughout his life, this was an issue he internally struggled with. However, there has been little to no evidence of this being fact. Police created this theory after tracking down some of Jack's movements in his final weeks and months and noted some of the places he went as being noteworthy for this theory. I don't have all the details on that, so I will continue to throw this out as nothing more than a theory. Police eventually brought out bloodhounds to the location of Jack's murder, the Rosewood Boat Landing, which is right in the heart of the Olympia neighborhood of Columbia. As I said earlier, this boat landing is hidden away on the east side of the Congaree River, but police were hoping that the dogs would be able to pick up a scent or something. Surprisingly, they did. The bloodhounds led police from the spot of Jack's murder to a nearby business. This business, which has remained unidentified in official reports, would pop up in the news a little over a year later. That's when another murder took place in Columbia, South Carolina. Kimberly Brown, a 30-year-old woman living in the northern outskirts of Columbia, worked at the same Moncrief Army Health Clinic as Jack Robinson. In fact, she had worked alongside Jack for over 5 years as a blood technician at the military hospital. Kimberly didn't have any children of her own, but she was the guardian for her niece, 3-year-old Leah Brazil. In some news reports, Leah is reported as being Kim's daughter, but Kim was taking care of the girl for the foreseeable future due to issues with Leah's estranged parents. On Tuesday, November 18, 1997, Kimberly failed to show up to work. This immediately surprised her co-workers, who noted her absence because she had never failed to show up before. Kimberly's mother, Cora, had tried calling Kimberly a few times. When her daughter failed to answer the phone, Cora became incredibly concerned. On Tuesday, she went over to Kim's apartment and was surprised to find the front door to the apartment unlocked. Letting herself in, she was shocked to find both Kimberly and Leah missing, but what looked like blood on the carpet. Cora contacted the Moncrief Army Hospital, who informed her that Kim had not shown up to work, and then immediately called the Richland County Sheriff's Department. Police began scouring Kim's apartment, looking for any clues. They quickly found Kim's address book and began reaching out to individuals that stood out, either family, friends, or mere acquaintances. One person of interest quickly emerged. His name was Max Noten, a young family friend. Max Noten was 20 years old at this point in 1997, and he had grown up close to Kimberly's family. You see, their fathers had joined the army together, using the buddy system. That led to both families going to the same duty stations and growing up alongside one another. Max was best friends with Kim's younger brother, and that's how the two continued to know one another. When police reached out to the contacts in Kim's address book, Max admitted to seeing Kimberly in the time period of 9 o'clock and 10 p.m. on Monday evening. When all was said and done, this became the last known sighting of the woman, making Max the main person of interest in the crime. Police asked Max if he would mind coming into the station to answer some questions, and he agreed. He gave the police a pretty detailed statement regarding his visit to Kimberly's apartment on Monday evening, but then stated that he left at around 10 p.m. and spent the night at a co-worker's home. When police reached out to this co-worker, he validated the alibi. Later on, however, he would rectify this statement by telling police that he had been asked to do so by Max Noten, that the younger man had not spent the night at his house, and he had been asked to lie to the police. Any suspicion police had had of Max would be amplified 100-fold after this admission, so they continued to follow through with him as the primary suspect. Police questioned Max again on Wednesday evening, and this is when his stories began to fall apart. When questioned, he made a statement to the effect of visiting Kimberly's apartment, leaving, blacking out for a period of hours, and then waking up at the same Rosewood boat landing that Jack Robinson had been murdered. Over the next 24 hours, Max gave increasingly sketchy statements to interrogators. After admitting to having consensual sex with Kimberly in his third confession, police were certain that something terrible had happened to the young woman, as well as the niece she was the guardian of. The body of Kimberly Brown was found by fishermen in the Congaree River that evening, Wednesday. It would take a few hours to identify her and locate her cause of death, but by the time police had both squared away, Max Noten had already confessed to the crime and told the full story. Apparently, he had gone over to Kim's apartment on Monday evening, where he had attacked Kimberly Brown, hitting her in the head with a sharp object before raping and strangling her. He wrapped up Kimberly in a blanket, putting her in his trunk, then leaving at the break of dawn. He took Kim's 3-year-old niece, Leah, with him, telling her that they were going to go find her aunt. The girl was still wearing her pajamas that morning when Max Noten pulled into the Rosewood boat landing parking lot just off of Highway 601. The body of Kimberly Brown was found on Wednesday, nude but still wrapped up in that blanket. She had been sexually assaulted before her death, giving police a clear motive for the crime. The body of 3-year-old Leah Brazil, however, wasn't found until Thursday morning. She was still wearing the pajamas from Monday evening, and police would identify her cause of death as drowning. Police searched the trunk of Max Noten and discovered blood smears that were consistent with Kimberly Brown. He would face trial in 2001, eventually being convicted on 2 counts of murder and kidnapping, with an additional charge of sexual assault. He was given 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, as well as an additional 30 years for the sexual assault. So, you may be wondering why, in an episode dedicated to Jack Robinson, I told you about the murders of Kimberly Brown and Leah Brazil. Well, while it does seem like an odd choice of a sidebar, that case would go on to directly affect the investigation into Jack Robinson. As always, my goal is to understand why a case or story remains unresolved, and this is a major factor. After the murders of Kimberly Brown and Leah Brazil, police began to piece together the case. And several aspects of the case matched up with Jack Robinson's death. After all, Kim and Jack knew one another, having worked together for half a decade. Then, you have the fact that Jack was murdered and Kim's body was dumped at, what all records indicate, the same boat ramp. And, not for nothing, you remember the bloodhounds I told you about? The dogs brought in after Jack's murder to pick up a scent? Those dogs led police straight from the spot Jack was murdered to a nearby business. Max Noten happened to work at that business. So, police were pretty certain that the case against Max Noten for Jack Robinson's murder would come together quite easily. They essentially told this to Tammy, Jack's daughter, assuring her that throughout the trial of Max in the early 2000s, they would learn more and put together a case against him. To Tammy and the rest of Jack's family, they were certain that Max Noten was the man who had killed their father. However, if you are a long-time listener of this podcast, you can probably guess what happens next. Nothing is as easy as it seems. When one truly examines the case against Max Noten for the murder of Jack Robinson, the faults are self-evident. First of all, the physical characteristics. The suspect in Jack Robinson's case was described as a Hispanic man, roughly 5'5", and somewhere between 150 and 180 pounds. He also had dark hair and a mustache, and described as being in the age range of 25 to 35. Max Noten, on the other hand, is a black man who stands an inch or so above 6 feet and weighed approximately 200 pounds at the time of his arrest. He does have dark hair, but showed no signs of a mustache, and he was only 20 at the time of his arrest in late 1997. That would make him 18 or 19 at the time of Jack Robinson's murder. Then, you have to take the motives into account. Max Noten attacked Kimberly Brown because he was going to sexually assault her. There's no proof that the crime against Jack Robinson was comparable. In fact, it seems like he was killed over a money dispute. Lastly, you have the information Jack was stabbed at the Rosewood boat landing and then left. Meanwhile, Kimberly was killed beforehand and then dumped there, along with her niece. When you look at the facts, they just don't match up. Other than a coincidence or two, the crimes are just not compatible with one another. However, we do know that police investigated Max Noten for the death of Jack Robinson for those early years in the investigation, where information was much easier to come by than it is now. We can see that they didn't do so deliberately, in an effort to curtail the investigation. They did it because Max was the only suspect that they could muster up based on the evidence they had. They would get some new evidence in the time period after Max Noten became a person of interest when investigators discovered a rusty knife nearby the scene of the crime. The knife, which appeared to have been there for some time, was a large hunting knife that had become rusty after exposure to the elements. It was found just a short distance away from where Jack Robinson had been stabbed, leading police to believe that it might be the murder weapon. They hoped to test the knife for DNA, but because it had been outdoors for a long period of time, any tests would be too inconclusive. Police were unable to verify that it was the murder weapon, but articles published as recently as the last 6 months indicate that they're still hopeful. Investigators hope that advances in DNA technology will allow them to test the knife more conclusively in the near future. Over the years, Jack's only child, Tammy, believed the case of her father's murder was solved. Police had told her that Max was their one and only suspect, and that even though they didn't have enough evidence against him at the time, they believed him to be the killer. However, in the mid-2000s, Tammy was browsing the internet when she came across something unusual. On the Richland County Cold Case website, the sheriff's department had her father's murder listed as an unsolved cold case. She got in touch with the investigators and discovered that they had dropped all assumptions about Max Noten years beforehand. They had, regretfully, never contacted Tammy to inform her of this development. Tammy looks back at this as one of the major mistakes of the investigation. All of those years, which she could have been using to act as her father's advocate, were now gone. She has spent the past decade trying to make up for lost time. She has joined up with several victim advocacy groups, such as Project Cold Case, based out of Florida. She penned a segment for a book the group published not too long ago, called Grief Diaries, where she writes about her father's case and the issues that arose after his death. Tammy is also hoping to raise awareness for her father's case, in the hopes that it may someday be solved. She has remained active online, posting facts from her father's case in almost every comment or message board available, and has spread the suspect sketch as far as she can. I was able to speak with Tammy while making this episode, and one thing is certain, she loves to talk. In our first phone conversation, which lasted about an hour, I believe I spoke for all of 3 minutes. She led me through the entire case of her father, the facts, theories, rumors, allegations, all of it, in a whirlwind of emotion. I truly feel for her and the rest of her family, who believed that Jack's case was pushed off to the side and quickly forgotten. For their credit, the Richland County Sheriff's Department have admitted their part in the sidetracked investigation. They openly admit that there was very little evidence to go off of, and because Jack Robinson was living such a private life at the time of his death, that there's not much they can do. Without any physical evidence to go on, there's no way to track down the suspect. Tammy has many of thoughts about the suspect and who he may be. I won't try to paraphrase, so I'll just let her do the talking. I must unfortunately close out the episode by telling you that, as of this moment, the 1996 murder of 65-year-old Jack L. Robinson remains unresolved.